Hello everyone and welcome to my The Bold Fans channel. I hope everyone is having a wonderful day. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. Ridge Forrester sat at the polished mahogany desk in the Forrester Creations executive suite. His jaw clenched and his fingers steepled under his chin, lengthy shadows produced by the gentle glow of the surveillance monitors. With her arms crossed over her chest and her blouse's silk whispering with each abrupt turn, Brooke Logan paced the length of the room beside him. It was a late hour. Only the distant city lights of Los Angeles gleaming beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows and the soft hum of the air conditioner remained after the majority of the building had been evacuated hours ago. They had not intended to be here tonight. They were both distracted from what should have been a peaceful evening at home by a routine review of the nightly security feeds, which Charlie had reported as strange activity in Eric's private office. Ridge tapped the keyboard while bending forward. The central screen's fuzzy black and white image sharpened. Timestamp: 11:47 p.m. the night before. The camera was positioned at a high angle, close to the ceiling in the corner of Eric Forrester's office, the one area of the building that, despite the passage of time, still seemed to be the center of the business. The low table covered in empty glasses and a half-empty bottle of whiskey was the first thing to catch my attention, followed by the couch. The two figures came next. With trembling shoulders, Steffy Forrester Finnegan sat on the edge of the couch. With one hand on her upper arm, Carter Walton stood nearby. They appeared to be having more than a casual discussion because of the way their bodies were oriented toward one another. Brooke ceased to pace. Her breath caught. "Play it," she muttered. Ridge gave a click. The video began to roll. The speakers were filled with Steffy's raw, wobbly voice. She was discussing Sheila, the flight to Monaco, and the realization that Finn had put his mother's safety ahead of his kids. Carter paid attention without interjecting. He got closer when she eventually started crying. He encircled her with his arms. She held on to him. The hug went on longer than was necessary for comfort. Her hand then reached up to his face. Her head tilt and the way his body moved to meet hers were captured on camera. The kiss that ensued was harsh. It was the kind of collision that occurs when two individuals have already determined that the rules are no longer applicable. It was hungry and desperate. Brooke's hand shot to her lips. Ridge's face hardened into something more icy than rage. The video went on. Clothes were thrown away with awkward haste. On the broad leather couch that used to be Eric's favorite spot to sketch, the camera unblinkingly captured all that transpired. When it was finally over, Steffi stirred and the screen went to static as the system automatically switched to the next camera feed. The two of them lay tangled together, exhausted and silent. Ridge and Brooke were silent for a considerable amount of time. The only sounds were the distant traffic far below and the gentle whir of the hard drive. The stillness was broken first by Ridge. "She is my daughter," he said in a low, nearly growling voice. "Additionally, I trusted him with this business. With everything." Brooke's eyes gleamed as she turned to face him. "Ridge, they're both married. Or they were. Steffi just parted ways with Finn. Carter and Daphne's marriage is in jeopardy. But this," she pointed to the frozen picture on the screen. "This is not consoling." Ridge sprang up so quickly that the chair rolled backward and hit the wall. "This is destruction." He moved to the window and gazed out at the city's shadowy outline. He briefly considered all of his years, the strong shoulders that had supported Forrester Creations through decades of storms bearing the weight of family and legacy. He said, "I warned Finn," without looking back. "I assured him that Sheila would never give up. I advised him to finally put his wife and kids ahead of that woman." Brooke shifted to his side, saying, "And now my daughter is in the arms of another man because Finn failed her." She touched his arm. "It's not just Finn. When she feels trapped, Steffi has always been aggressive. Carter, on the other hand, has been aimless for months. Something was broken in him by Daphne's failure to conceive. He began searching every place for solace. Steffi was handy, susceptible." Ridge gave a brief, sour laugh. "Right there. Convenient. Are we now referring to it that way? He scrubbed the timeline forward after turning back to the display. On the following footage, the office was illuminated by morning light. Steffy was the first to wake up, naked and confused. Carter was awakened by her kick. Her expression was filled with panic as she fumbled for her garments. Carter rubbed his face and sat up more slowly, immediately assessing the damage. Without saying anything further, Steffy ran away after checking her phone and seeing the deluge of texts from Finn. Carter stayed behind, collecting the empty bottles and adjusting the cushions in an attempt to remove any proof of their actions. Every rushed motion was captured on video. Brooke's tone became softer. She feels bad about it. Ridge responded. You can see it. Regret doesn't rewrite the footage. Furthermore, it doesn't alter the implications for the business. For the household. He reclined on the chair and placed the heels of his hands to his eyes, saying, for everyone who has ever trusted either of them. Recollections flooded in, including the many years of loyalty that now felt like ash, Steffy as a young child snuggling onto his lap after a nightmare, and Carter standing by him through personal betrayals and boardroom conflicts. After drawing a second chair close, Brooke took a seat. She made no attempt to break the stillness. When the walls of Ridge's meticulously planned universe started to fall apart, she had long since discovered that he required room. A few minutes later he spoke once more, but more softly. Brooke nodded and said, we have to decide what to do with this. Charlie is already aware that something is amiss. The nighttime activity was flagged by him. Someone else will discover it if we leave it. Hope, Amos, Eric, the media. We must not allow it to occur. So we bury it. Ridge's eyes flickered. Until the next explosion. Protect them the same way we always protect one another. No, Brooke said in a stern tone. We face them. In private. Before everything is destroyed and this is made public. Instead of hearing it from a tabloid, Steffy should hear it from you. Carter must acknowledge the harm he has caused to Daphne and this family. And Finn, she paused. Ridge gazed at the frozen picture of his daughter's face, soft with slumber in the early morning light, the wedding ring still missing from her hand. Finn deserves the truth, even if it ends what little is left of his marriage. He said, I let her down. I ought to have been more severe with Finn right away. I ought to have seen her growing intimacy with Carter. I missed the storm building right under this roof because I was so preoccupied with the designs, the shows, and the next line, Brooke said, reaching across to grasp his hand. You didn't let her down. We are powerless to influence every decision our kids make. Steffy has reached adulthood. Even if alcohol and sadness distorted her judgment, she made this choice with an open mind. Carter followed suit. He clasped her fingers and said, they both have to own it. Their long-standing bond, which had endured decades of separation and reconciliation, briefly flared. Then they were both brought back to the present by the weight of the video. For the next hour, they went over every angle and timestamp to be sure no other cameras could have captured more. Charlie had made extensive upgrades to his system. The tape in Eric's office was the only one that had any bearing. Ridge sealed the original video behind several passwords and transferred the data to a safe drive. Charlie was told to seal the nightly logs and not talk to anyone until further notice in a brief message that Brooke wrote. The eastern sky was starting to brighten as they eventually left the building. There was silence on the way home. At 10:02, Ridge's hands were still locked on the steering wheel while Brooke gazed out the passenger window. The discussion they would need to have in the morning was not brought up by either of them. They didn't have to. The route ahead was clearly obvious, and it went directly through the center of the family they both cherished. Ridge filled 2 glasses with water at the mansion and gave one to Brooke. As the first birds outside started to sing, they stood together in the kitchen. For the first time since the monitors had gone dark, he put down his glass and gave her his whole attention. He said, I don't know how to face her. My young daughter. Brooke moved into his arms. The one who used to think I could fix anything. You confront her in the same manner that you have always dealt with difficult situations. Sincerely. And with unwavering love. He embraced her firmly, inhaling the comforting aroma of her hair. The peaceful house and the two of them were all that was visible for a brief moment. Then the harsh and inevitable reality of what was ahead at Forrester Creations came back. That night they didn't sleep. Rather, they sat on the patio as the sun rose over the hills, discussing in hushed voices how to address Steffy and Carter, how to keep the kids safe, and whether this one week night might ruin years of meticulously restored trust. Brooke informed him that the marriage was already over and that Steffy had already left Finn. Ridge retorted that when Finn discovered the truth, the crack would widen into a chasm. Until the coffee cooled and the city sprang to life all around them, they kept asking the same questions. Ridge had called Steffy by 9 o'clock, requesting that they meet in the executive suite at 11. He spoke in a deliberately neutral tone. Using the internal system, Brooke got in touch with Carter and asked for the same meeting, presenting it as an urgent business issue. They didn't bring up the video. They were both aware that everything would alter as soon as they entered. Steffy appeared worn out when she came first. Her eyes were shadowed by dark circles. She wore a modest black dress that somehow managed to look elegant, and her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail. Unaware that the identical couch behind her had served as the setting for the betrayal the night before, she kissed her father's cheek and took a seat across from the desk. A few minutes later, Carter came in. He was the epitome of professional poise, carrying a document under one arm, until he noticed Ridge's inscrutable look and Brooke standing close to the glass. Slowly, the folder dropped to his side. Ridge didn't waste time making small talk. He hit play after turning the display so they could both see it. The recorded sounds from the previous night filled the room again. The rustle of clothes, the mumbled words of consolation that changed into something else, the quiet cries, and the distinct cadence of two people crossing a line they would never be able to cross again. Steffy's face lost all of its color. Carter's cheek muscle leaped as his jaw tightened. Until the last frame froze on their sleeping forms, neither of them took their eyes off the television. There was a long period of silence. Steffy was the first to speak, hardly raising her voice above a whisper. "Dad!" Ridge raised a hand. "Don't. Not yet," he said, glancing from his daughter to the guy who had treated him like a son. "I want you two to comprehend something. This family and company have survived scandals in the past. It has endured public humiliation, deceit, and extramarital affairs. The total breakdown of trust among those who are meant to be in charge of it is what it might not endure." Carter found his voice. "You two have put every single person who loves you in an impossible position. It was an error. An awful, inebriated error. We both regret it." "After the fact, regret is easy," Brooke muttered. Steffy's eyes brightened as she said, "Living with the consequences is harder." She looked at her dad. "I was furious. I'm so hurt. Once more, Finn went with Sheila. I thought I was going to drown." The only person who understood was Carter. Ridge's expression did not soften. "I never meant for it to go that far. The video is not erased by intentions. Additionally, when this is discovered, they do not shield your kids from the consequences. Because Steffy, it will be discovered." Carter moved forward saying, "Secrets this big never stay buried forever. If you require it, I'll step down. With instant effect. I'll accept full accountability." "No," Steffy said sharply. "Steffy shouldn't have to carry this alone. The decision was taken by both of us." Ridge stared between them for a long time. "We both live with it." His shoulders were burdened by decades of parenting. At last he spoke, his words measured. "You'll let Finn know. You'll let Daphne know. You'll finish it today before anyone else tells them." Steffy winced as if she had been hit. "After that, you will both take a leave of absence from the company while we decide whether either of you still has a place here." Carter shut his eyes. Moving to Steffy's side, Brooke put a hand on her shoulder. "You are not being abandoned by us. We're making you confront the reality before it ruins everything that remains. There is still a way forward. But honesty is the first step." Steffy nodded, tears streaming down her face. Carter said nothing, leaving the folder where it had dropped to the ground. Ridge switched off the screen. The screen darkened. The only sounds in the abrupt silence of the office were the distant hum of the city outside, flowing forward as if nothing had changed, and the gentle ticking of the wall clock. However, everything had. 4 years to come, every relationship, every business decision, and every family dinner would be impacted by the one night of weakness that the camera had documented. Ridge went back to the window. Brooke remained with Steffy. Carter stood by himself close to the door, already weighing the price of having to tell the truth. Outside, a world that will never look the same again was illuminated by the harsh and merciless Los Angeles sun rising higher. Ridge Forrester stood with his arms crossed and his mouth set in that well-known line of barely controlled strain as long shadows were cast over the polished floor by the faint glow of the monitors in the security office at Forrester Creations. Even before the video started to play, Brooke Logan was leaning forward next to him, her fingers hovering over the keyboard, her heart pounding. They had only come here based on a gut feeling. Charlie reported late at night that there had been strange activity in the executive suite the night before. Nothing tangible. Just enough to drag them both out of the unsettling silence of their house and into the deserted corridors of the organization that had shaped so much of their lives. It had been Ridge who had insisted. He sought answers after the turmoil of the previous few weeks, including Steffy's sudden return from Monaco, Sheila Carter's reappearance, and the break in his daughter's marriage to Finn. At first, Brooke had made an effort to dissuade him, claiming that even in a family as complicated as theirs, privacy still had value. But she was exhausted by the concern in his eyes. 4 hours, Steffy had been unavailable. Carter had been just as elusive. And when Ridge entered the office that morning, it didn't feel right, usually a stronghold of order under Carter's meticulous supervision. On the side table was a half-empty bottle of whiskey. On the couch, a throw blanket was hastily folded. There was still a subtle perfume odor in the air that didn't belong to any of the usual employees. Charlie had carefully maintained a neutral demeanor while pulling the pertinent files. "Main office cameras," he muttered. "All night. Do you want the motion-triggered parts only, or the entire feed?" Ridge spoke in a quiet voice. "Everything." The screen sprang to life. It was just after 11 the night before, according to the timestamp in the corner. The CEO's suite was visible in gentle lamplight from a broad perspective. Carter Walton was sitting on the edge of the big leather couch with a glass in his hand and his tie undone. He appeared worn out, the kind of bone-deep fatigue that results from more than just a demanding workday. Steffy Forrester strolled across from him, her hair slightly tousled from the lengthy flight, her travel attire still on. Her hands were moving as she spoke quickly, her words barely audible via the camera's small microphone, but her emotion was clear. Brooke gasped for air. She whispered, "She's been drinking. Observe how she's moving." Ridge remained silent. When Steffy finally stopped pacing and fell onto the couch next to Carter, his gaze remained riveted on the TV. They were not far from one another. She turned to face him, and even in the absence of clear audio, her head tilt and the inward slump of her shoulders conveyed the impression of someone who had reached her limit. Carter put down his glass. He extended his arm and gently placed one hand on her shoulder. It was intended to be consoling, almost brotherly. However, Steffy's body movement and the way she leaned into it instantly altered the situation. 20 minutes were added to the video. They were motionless on the couch when the camera was activated. Carter's chest held Steffy's head. She was encircled by his arm. They resumed their conversation, but more softly. Steffy then raised her face. Carter gave her a downward glance. Neither moved for a long moment. Then she kissed him, closing the gap that remained between them. Brooke let forth a tiny sound that was half protest, half gasp. Ridge's knuckles whitened as his hand gripped the desk's edge more tightly. The kiss intensified. Carter cupped the back of Steffy's neck with his other hand. She pressed in closer, getting up on her knees on the cushions. What had started out as comfort turned into something completely else. Clothes moved. They were covered by the throw blanket that had been placed over the couch's arm. The two of them vanished into the private area that the camera could only partially capture as the lights in the office stayed low. Reaching forward, Ridge stopped the playback. On a blurry tangle of limbs and fabric, the image froze. He and Brooke were silent for a few seconds. The server racks behind the monitors hummed softly, but that was the only sound. Finally, in a gruff voice, Ridge added, "Play the rest." After a moment of hesitation, Brooke clicked the mouse. The video started up again. Once more, time leap. It is 4 in the morning. It was darker in the room. Still encased in the same blanket, the two individuals on the couch had fallen asleep. Carter's shoulder was covered with Steffy's hair. Even when she was unconscious, his arm was still around her. One more leap. It's 6:15. Steffy was the first to stir. The blanket came off as she gently sat up. The precise instant her expression changed from sleepy perplexity to icy dread was captured on tape. She glanced down at Carter, who was still asleep, then at her bare shoulders, and finally, as if for the first time, around the familiar office. With a sudden urgency, she shook him awake. With the feverish energy of people who knew exactly what they had done and how disastrous it could become, they rushed to get clothes. Steffi located her phone and gazed at the screen as her face lost its color. She spoke quickly. Carter grimaced as he nodded. Then she was gone, walking out the door and into the hallway, leaving him by himself to fold the blanket and do his best to remove the night's evidence. In the last scene, Carter was seen standing in the center of the office shortly after daybreak, gazing at the vacant couch for a considerable amount of time before turning off the last of the lamps and walking out.